Serious, children of teen parents, what was growing up like? I was conceived in her 8th grade year and born that summer. Growing up wasn't abnormal. I thought everyone had young parents, so when I saw my peers' parents, I thought it was their grandparents. It wasn't the greatest. My mother had me when she was 17 and still in school. As a result, my grandparents watched me whenever she wasn't able to do so, and as time passed, that happened more and more often. But they actually ended up raising me but still encouraged a relationship with her. Looking back, I'm convinced that did a lot more harm than good. She just wasn't ready to be a mother so young. She was the sort who was very social and loved to party and needed to be part of the in crowd. When she was finally ready for children, she went on to have a replacement kid, a do-over. Someone once described it, who, to this day, is by far the favorite child. My mother and I are not close at all, and I still have a lot of lingering issues I've needed to work through over the years because of it. Sorry dude. I hope you managed and ended up in a better place than you started. My parents have 2 sets of kids. They raised my older brother and I when they were teenagers and had my little brother and sister toward their 30/40s. Growing up, my parents had no money or family support. We didn't have many toys. We ate simply and the presents we got were necessities wrapped up nicely. What they did have was time and energy, and we were rich quality time. Now my parents are much better off, having finished school and established themselves professionally. My 20 years younger siblings are drowning in toys and camps, playgroups and activities. But my parents are tired. I took for granted how much time and energy my parents had to simply play and engage with me as a kid. I can't help but see the activities as a way to get the little ones out of the house and the toys as an apology for being burned out. I have a great relationship with my parents. I like them as people and enjoy their company. It was, and is, odd to watch them become adults, settle into themselves and their lives. It did set me apart from other kids growing up, and of course other parents and teachers whispered. I put effort into living well to spite them. My parents sweat blood to make sure siblings and I have what we need, and we do. Occasionally we joke about being neighbors in an old folks home and racing walkers down the hallways. My mother was 16 when she gave birth to my older sister. My dad was in his 40s. So this is half relevant. When she got pregnant, her parents disowned her and she moved from New York to Oregon with my dad. Growing up, it was a strict religious upbringing, obviously dominated by my father. He died when I was young, which in a way was good, cause my dad was a jerk, but in another way left a high school dropout stay-at-home mom the primary breadwinner for 2 kids, one of whom was disabled. She was and is a great mom, but at the time she struggled providing for us. We were homeless for a while, then lived in a pop-up for a couple years, but eventually she got to get a job as a school lunch lady. I ate lots of cafeteria food, continued at school and eventually got a career. She is a teacher now. I'm very proud of her. I've never met any of my extended family. Kinda sucked a lot. They were both too young and emotional to handle each other, let alone us. Tried their best, but they couldn't answer questions the way kids need. They were still kids themselves. A friend of mine, Rob, recently went out with a big group and found that he was quite attracted to one of the ladies of the party. He was weirded out when it turned out to be his best friend's mum. His friend is 8 years younger than him. His friend's mum was 14 when she gave birth, so Rob is only about 5 years younger than this lady. My mom tried to sell me, so she was 17-18. Mom had me at 18. Not long after graduating high school. She's always been very mature and was extremely dedicated to taking care of me and meeting my needs. My dad, who was 21 at the time, was a lot less involved, and my parents fought often. They broke up when I was 4, which I honestly think is for the better. My mom always gave all that she had for me and my sister, who came along 2 years after me, and I'm so grateful for her being so mature and determined to put us before anything or anyone else. I love you, Mom. My mom wasn't a teen when she had me, but it wasn't until recently that I noticed how much she sacrificed to be there for me. She worked at a factory from 5 to 5 and still came home to take me out somewhere every single day. My favorite place was the public library. Moms are amazing. To be honest, it was fine. My parents were both 17 when I was born. It sucked at times, especially when I had to take care of the younger siblings and cook starting when I was 7, but my parents loved us so much. I knew from an early age how hard they worked for us, so I didn't mind helping out. It just became our normal. That's part of the reason my parents worked hard, was to keep everything as normal as possible, particularly for my younger siblings. As I got older, when they were in their 30s, things became much more steady, and now they are just like any other loving lower middle class family. All the kids are doing great. I'm trying really hard to save money so I can pay for the honeymoon they never got to have because they had me instead. I'm trying really hard to save money so I can pay for the honeymoon they never got to have because they had me instead. Wipe size, I'm not crying. What? 2 flies went straight into my eyes. My mother had me her last year of high school with my father. My father really isn't a bad guy, but he was a stupid 20-year-old who loved money. He ended up going to jail for selling drugs, while the rest of my family already presumed that since my mom has a child before even graduation high school, she would be unsuccessful. In a family of high expectations, she attended college while her parents watched over me during the day, which is a good reason why everything turned out okay. She used her resources instead of being prideful and not wanting help with raising a child. She pulled through, and I can honestly say my childhood didn't miss anything. We lived with my grandparents till I was 6, and she finally got her career job to make it on her own. She was young and smart and did everything for me. She also wasn't one to deny help when she needed it, which is probably why she beat the odds and succeeded so well. So yes, as far as I know, I had a normal childhood. TLDR. 17-year-old mom becomes successful even from doubt of family and father in prison. Good childhood and never starved. I hope I can be as good as your mom. I'm a guy though, but it sounds like she did really well. I had my son at 18, and I think we're going to be fine. But I want to look back and think that he didn't miss anything because I had him early. I want him to have the life he would have had if he had been born when I was, say, 30. I'm trying. Thanks for the motivation. Mom was 16, dad 19 when they had me. I was raised by my dad's mother, as my mother was too young and immature. My mom didn't even finish school. My dad graduated. When I was 2, they got jobs in the city and moved there. My grandmother would get monthly allowance to look after me and pay for the necessities. Mom and dad would visit twice every year and bring lots of presents. I went to a prestigious private school and did well in my studies. I missed them a lot, especially my mother, but she was never there when I needed her. My grandmother tried her best, but sometimes you just need your mom. They tried their best. I am very thankful for that, but wish things were different. Hey, just a note from an internet person, hoping you're doing well and your life is good now. My mother was 16 when I was born, and had 4 kids by the time she was 21. My dad took off, never to be seen by us again. He passed away about 5 months ago. My siblings have a different father. Honestly, life wasn't all that bad growing up. My siblings are now all well-adjusted adults, with families, full-time jobs, living on their own comfortably. I have a great relationship with their father and them. They are always there for me, and I'm always there for them. The hardest part for me was not knowing my dad. His dad was the biggest male role model I had. Both him and my grandma were great and had a lot of guilt because of who my dad was. After years of blaming myself for his leaving, my grandpa sent me a letter shortly before his death last month detailing exactly how big of a piece of crap he was. So I'll let it go. All in all, I turned out okay. Depression problems every once in a while, but I've learned to cope with it. My weirdest time was puberty. I refused to even consider fricking while I was in high school. My mom dropped out of high school with a 4.0 GPA to take care of us, and I always hated that. I never had a girlfriend in high school because of how anti-fricking I was, but relationships and dating haven't been a problem as an adult. My mom was and still is a rockstar parent, who showed up for every hockey game, every lacrosse game, every baseball game, every quiz bowl, every spelling bee, and made sure I graduated high school with my US citizenship, born in Canada, and nearly straight A's. Freaking calculus B. Now that I have kids of my own, I'm following the excellent example set by my mother and my grandparents. My wife is a fantastic mother, I try my best to be a great father, and my mom is there every step of the way. TLDR. My dad was a piece of crap. I love my mommy. Oh my goodness, for a second I thought you were one of my siblings. My biological mom had my siblings and I in that same time frame as well, and my siblings and I have different fathers too. My mum was 18 and my dad 19. They already had a 2-year-old when I was born. When recalling stories from my childhood, I often have to end with, but they were so young. How can I be upset at them for not knowing? I've heard a lot of teenagers say they want to be young parents so they can relate to their children. What they really need to do is wait, so they can be a parent to their children, and look after their children financially and emotionally, not be their friend. I had plenty of friends. I needed a parent. My son was born when I was 19. I'm 24 now. His mother and I split up when he was 3, and she tries to be his friend more than she tries to be his mother. I'm the opposite. I try to parent him more than be his friend. My mom was 16 and my dad was 19 years old. I was born in Toledo. Oh, and my mom dropped out of high school to get 2 waitress jobs. My dad, who had just dropped out, became a painter roofer. We lived in my grandma's basement for a while until we spent the next 10 years jumping from several houses, each better than the last. My mom was always very kind, but was hardly there because of work. My dad was strong and calm, but he wasn't good at interacting with me, which pushed us apart. A majority of my life lessons and knowledge came from teachers, internet, and friends, as my parents never really had the ability to answer my questions. I really started noticing this when they stopped being able to help with my homework around 8th grade. Around age 9, I started to realize that my parents were arguing a lot, and this arguing persisted until I was 16. Then things got physical. This finally climaxed at the peak of our financial stability, living in a quite nice home. My dad finally snapped and beat my mom one night while I was playing The Last of Us. He slammed her head against the wall and she almost fell on top of the toddler we were watching at the time. This was about 10 months ago. I then called the cops and moved in with my aunt. They finally divorced a few months back. I've been here since, working as an EMT, and should be a paramedic by March. My relationship with them is abysmal at best. My mom had her hand in destroying that home. She cheated several times, but my dad was awful as well. I refuse to see him, and any time I've tried has ended in disappointment. I understand the struggles they endured, but I don't want to try and fix a relationship that was never really there. Hey, I hope you're doing alright right now. Congrats on training to be a paramedic. That's pretty cool. I hope the rest of your life is great. Nice at times, not so great at other times. She had me when she was 17. My father immediately left once I was born. Soon after he was sent to prison on drug charges. A little later he died there. My mom never told me why and I never cared too much to ask why. My mom jumped from boyfriend to boyfriend a lot. Now I realize she would use them for money. So never had a father figure. When I was in 1st grade my mom got sent to prison on drug charges, selling and using M. During this year I lived with her parents. I don't remember much of anything before she got out other than memories such as her slapping me for giving her a flower saying flowers belong in nature. I also remember learning to cook very basic things, microwave only, and always got myself up. If I woke up late I would try to wake her up, which was extremely difficult to have her drive me to school. This would usually lead to her yelling at me. If I didn't wake her up she would also yell at me for not going to school. She was out for a year. I didn't understand what had happened or that she was a bad mother, so I of course went back to her with open arms. After that year she went back for another year. After that our relationship was stumbled. I didn't realize I became a closed shell until very recently. We hardly talked, I hardly asked her for anything, but when I did she would usually give it to me out of guilt. When I was in the 6th grade we jumped from 4 states because she was in the timeshare industry. When we got to Arizona she started using again. It took me to literally beg for us to go back home. When she did she stopped using. I believe. 8th grade I have a little sister and she's been with this one guy for 4 years at this point. She's stopped using and I start to open up a little to her, but still very closed. Now I'm a freshman in college and live on my own. Work 5 days of the week and the other 2 I go to school. My mother was recently sentenced to 15 years. My sister lives her father. Why I don't live with him is another story. We're cool with each other. His father is not. I'm planning on driving to see her on her birthday, but that probably won't happen. I'm sorry about the flower thing. That was harsh. I am happy to say I broke the cycle of teen parents in my family. My grandmother was 16 when she had my mom. My mom was 19 when she had me. My brother is 23 with 3 kids. I don't have a great relationship with either parent. My mom is a narcissist. I wonder if the fact she was raised by a teenager contributed to that. My parents divorced and still fight to this day. I mean, they physically fought at drop-offs and one or the other would end up in jail. At least now it's just court battles. My mom was borderline abusive, neglectful. We always had CPS visits. I was forced to raise my youngest brother, 11-year difference. When I was a teenager, I had to take him with me everywhere I went because my mom wanted me to know what it was like to have a kid. She beat my brother with a giant frying pan, then called the cops on him and told me if I told the police the truth they would take us away and we'd never see each other again. My brother, around 11 or 12, ended up going to jail that night. My grandmother told me about when I was a baby. My mom worked multiple jobs and when she was home she needed to sleep. So she would just lock me in a room and give me some cereal and turn on the TV while she slept. Knowing that was how I was treated in my early stage of life partly explains why I am socially awkward. On a positive note, my daughter has met most of her great-grandparents and even has a great-great-grandmother that's still alive. So there's that, which is pretty cool. Mom had me when she was 18. My parents married right after I was born. Both my parents worked as my mom took night classes. After she was done with school, we moved to a way better area and a much nicer house. They had my little brother who is 5 now. They are great parents and I couldn't ask for anything more. I start my senior year of high school on Thursday. I thought everyone that looked older was an adult. In my mind until I was about 8. My parents and grandparents looked like they were the same age, so I thought they were. Even now, I remember thinking my aunt was an adult my whole life, but in reality, she was only 11 when I was born. My parents found out they were pregnant with my brother in 1987 when my mother was 18 and my father was 17. They were both living in Ukraine at the time and had known each other since first grade. After my father turned 18 in September, he found out that he had been drafted into the military and had to leave within months. They ended up getting married in November 1987 and he left soon after. He never finished high school. My brother was born in 1988 and my father wasn't there for the birth and my mother was left to take care of him herself while still going to school. He ended up returning a few months later. I'm not sure how their life was in Ukraine, but they ended up moving to Israel and then had me in 1997. Mother 29. Father 28. We ended up moving to America in 1998, which was really hard because we didn't know the language and we had no money. We lived paycheck to paycheck most of the time, which led to my parents fighting a lot of the time. My mom went to college twice while in America and now is an accountant. My father never pursued any education and still does not have a high school diploma, but he is now a really successful plumber. Now my parents are 47 and 48, making 6 figures and just bought a brand new luxury car and a new house. My brother is 29 and my parents paid for all of his college education. I am almost 20 and my parents are also paying for my college. It was hard, but we made it through the hardships and live very comfortably. My mom had me when she was 16. My dad was 19. Growing up with them being so young was a lot of fun, although we definitely lived modestly. They were also incredibly strict and believed in physical punishment, so I was extremely well behaved. When I went through puberty, I began to realize how young they actually were, especially when I'd see my friends' parents. Also, all the time, people would ask if my parents were my brother and or sister. That grew to be pretty annoying actually. Also, after realizing how young they were, I began to feel guilty for being born, to have caused them so many hardships. That's the worst part of it, I think. To know that raising me took away a lot of opportunities and closed a lot of doors for them. I think my mom was 17 when she had me. My dad turned 21 a few days after I was born. They were into drugs, my mom in particular. My mom was also an alcoholic who drank until I was 5. She was a horrible parent. There were some good times, but she was abusive and neglectful. I was expected to be the adult in the house. I cooked and spent a lot of time alone. Most mornings until I was around 6. I was by myself and she was dead to the world. She had 2 other kids, whose father she was married to, one when I was 6 and one when I was 8. I raised them when they were babies. The husband resented me and was rarely around. I hate when people congratulate her for being sober because she continued to treat me badly after. People just noticed less because she wasn't drunk while doing it. Sometimes I wish she hadn't gotten sober, so that someone would have done something sooner. When I was 16, my dad got joint custody. I had only seen him every other weekend for most of my life and was so glad that was not the case after the ruling. A few months ago I told my mom I no longer want her in my life. I don't think we will ever have a real conversation again. My mother ended up having several children, and I was the last. When she had my brother, she managed to finish high school and tried to go to college but dropped out. She managed though. I hear a lot of stories from my bros and sisters and my mom about houses with no heat or cars with missing bottoms because lack of money, but they always made it through. The first part of my childhood saw a lot of similar troubles, but finally when I was around 8 or 9 my mother landed a pretty okay job. During all this though, my mother was also pretty much shunned by the rest of her family. I think the toughest part of it though is how much pain she went through because she had a child so early. I know that's weird to say, but there were days I would wake up too early, and she would be out back crying, and for the longest time I didn't know why. As she's opened up more, I realize it's a mix of things, but a lot of it goes back to just all the obstacles she's had to overcome after being a teenage mother. She had to leave an abusive relationship, had to drop out and give up some of her dreams, had to find places to stay after her family basically shunned her, etc. etc. It was hard, but I'm so proud of her, and she always did her best, and I think she raised us all as best as she could. She didn't care about me. She's trying to mend bridges now that I'm an adult, but it still feels fake. I agree with the other commenter. It was weird to meet my friend's parents. I think I had a good upbringing. My mom was 16. Dad was 17 or 18. When I was a baby they lived with my dad's family, then got a trailer house next door when my dad graduated. They struggled real bad at first. Dad tried to be a party boy still. My mom put her foot down and said she will leave if he doesn't straighten up. They got married when I was 2. He left for boot camp the next day. They left our horrible hometown and moved a lot, but my dad had a good career. My mom was always more of a friend but knew when it was time to be mom mode. Since they both grew up poor, they made sure I had everything I needed and spoiled me in my teen years. My dad left for Korea for his 1-year deployment and my mom went for 6 months. Me and my sister, 7 years younger, stayed with my grandparents. I was 16 and that's the only thing I'll never forgive her for. I left my whole life and stayed with family and was miserable. I wanted to go home. I didn't know when she was coming back. My grandma didn't know how to parent, so I was left watching my sister who was probably 10. After both my parents came back we were good, closer than ever, and all agreed we needed to stay together cause crap goes bad for us when we're apart. But last year they moved states and left my sister with me. I was 19, so she could finish the semester. My life went to heck. I won't even get into that. Last December I quit my job, used all my money to move me and my sister to them in another state, and my life turned upside down. Everything is great now. My parents are making good money, taking care of my baby sister better than ever, spoiling her like they spoiled me, and I moved into my own place this week. They got me back on my feet, helped me out as much as possible in this new place I didn't know. I'm grateful for everything they did and I wouldn't change anything. Our struggles brought us together more than anything. My parents had me when they were 16, and they both had to drop out of high school to raise me. Both were also kicked out of their parents' house because of me. So, my parents somehow survived for 2 years on their own, got married, and my dad joined the military. TBH, growing up with teens parents sucked. My parents were growing up with me. They partied and drank like sailors. I didn't have a normal childhood. I grew up in a party environment. I had to grow up fast myself so I could take care of my siblings and my own parents when they got crap faced. I missed many opportunities in sports and general school activities since my parents were never there to help and guide me, or even take me to school at times. Grades suffered due to that result and I had to be held back a grade in elementary school. I didn't have many friends since I was the one maintaining a household and practically raising my own siblings while both of my parents worked. Generally, my parents definitely were not ready for a kid. However, even with their faults, I never went hungry and they tried their best to give me everything they couldn't have when they were younger and living in poverty. My dad moved up ranks within the military and educated himself up to a master's degree. My mom ended up getting her associates and landed herself a good career in social work. My siblings and I turned out alright. I know now as an adult my parents tried their dang best with what little they had. They always loved us and never once blamed us for the situation they were in. My father even apologized to my siblings and I for the way we were raised, and even admitted if he could he would have waited a lot longer to have me, in order to provide a better life for his kids. TBH, I feel blessed for still having two parents together after they had me, and that we miraculously turned out alright and somewhat normal. And I love my parents dearly. However, I wouldn't recommend growing up with teen parents. It fucking sucks. My mom had my older sister when she was 16 and me when she was 19. I lived with my mother over the first 10 years of my life. We lived in a small house, ate hamburger helper almost every night. She would work 12 hours days 5 days a week to support us. After doing that for 10 years, she got worn out and tired. She started living her party days that she had missed out on because she was raising children. She ended up back on drugs and homeless, and my sister and I lived with my grandmother. Her excuse is that she didn't have the opportunity to get it out of her system when she was supposed to. At first it was terrible. My dad was 19 and my mom was 17. For several years they were both working 3 jobs at various restaurants while my mother went to college. We had literally nothing. Finally my mother finished school and that gave them enough money for them to both start their own businesses. They both make a couple million a year now. So needless to say, by the time I was a teenager, it was quite a bit better for me. Both my parents were 16 when they had me. My dad couldn't handle it and left before I was born. He died when I was 13, and he never even saw me. My mother did her best to raise me, but she finished high school just after I was born. So we were in poverty through most of my childhood and I missed a lot of meals growing up. She never really had time for me, and the most family activity we had was if I had a doctor or dentist appointment we would get food afterwards. Other than that we never really spent time together. This led to me reading a lot, and being pretty introverted, especially as I was not allowed outside often. She got an abusive boyfriend when I was 5, had 2 kids and multiple restraining orders on him until he died when I was 14. She then got a new deadbeat boyfriend and has just had her 2nd kid with him. My 3 younger siblings have always been treated a lot better than I was. For example, for my 18th birthday I got a laptop from my entire family. Just that one gift and I loved it. For the following Christmas both my brother and sister got the newer model of the same laptop plus a bunch of other things. I'm a lot closer to my aunts and my grandparents than I am to my mother. We just never had much of a connection as we are very different people. I'm sorry that you had to experience your early life like this. You sound very grateful for what you have even during the circumstances you described. : We were dirt poor but I had the happiest childhood. My parents dropped out of high school and each of my parents took turns working a minimum wage job or stay-at-home parenting. We lived in cooperative housing so there were many other children around to play with and daily programs at the Coops Community Center for us. We were hungry a lot, but we just thought hunger pangs were a normal part of life and didn't complain too much about it. My parents were full of energy and loved to play and read. We sometimes rented a VCR so we could watch a movie on the weekend. It was a big treat. They'd give us $1 and we could choose any candies we wanted at the corner store to eat while we watched the movie. Our best Christmas was when Dad saved up all year to buy us a Nintendo. It was a really big deal. Usually we got things like socks, pencils and coloring books at Christmas. Dad once felt so bad that he couldn't buy me a Barbie house that he built one from scratch. Let me tell you, this house was the ugliest and worst Barbie house I could ever imagine. but the look on my dad's face, I still remember how happy he was to give it to me and him watching to see how I would react to his heartfelt gift. Thank goodness that, at 7 years old, I knew well enough to thank him and play with the dirty, splintery, crooked, wobbly wood house. It made him so happy. The best part about having teen parents is how much time I still have with them now as an adult. They are young grandparents and they may even see my children have children. It's a true blessing. I adore my teen parents. They have been together since they were 12 years old. Parents were 16 when I was born. I ended up with my grandparents from mom's side. Well, actually my great grandparents, but that's a whole other story. Growing up was relatively normal. I'd see my parents fairly often growing up, weekends and holidays and all that. My parents ended up having other kids with different people, and I will admit I'm a bit jealous of my siblings that actually got to know my parents a bit better than I did. But my grandparents are awesome people, so it all ended up okay in the end. On a final note, it's still difficult for me to view my parents as parents and not friends since they weren't really responsible for raising me. My mom got pregnant with me at 17, had me a week after her 18th birthday, got to personally attend all 3 of her graduations, HS, BA and law, just like she's attend every one of mine. But to answer your question, being the child of a teen mom was very hard and very stressful at times, but I was also very loved and in a much luckier scenario than most kids like me. My mom is my hero and a total badass. She has always done what she had to make our life work, and worked full time while going to college, sometimes even with a second job, on top of raising me as a single parent, thankfully with the help of my amazing grandparents. We had very little money, but what we did have was always spent on things to support me before her, and never in a way I even noticed until later on. She always found a way to give me a normal, happy life. But it wasn't all rainbows either. On the flip side of this, I also witnessed my mother's deep sadness, struggle, anxiety and just the immense loneliness she felt dealing with all she dealt with on her own, to slowly dig her way out for us to have a better life. All of this on top of her having to give up her own dreams and youth in the process. Dating was really tough for her. She cried a lot alone in her room. It broke my heart. I loved my mom so much. She also had the strength to divorce my abused biological father very early on, just a year after I was born, to protect me before he could hurt me too. She's had a tough life by choosing me, and even though she tried to hide all of this, it was always obvious to me and became my pain and sadness too growing up. As a child I always felt this immense anxiety and need to somehow soothe and make each of the adults in my family happier and feel okay. I know that anxiety is still with me today, but in the end everything has turned out really well for our family. I'm so proud of us. My mom's happily married now and a practicing lawyer that earns a great 6-figure salary. Everyone in my family regularly talks and loves each other, and is genuinely there to support each other however we can. I'm still working through my issues with anxiety, but have also gone out on my own, armed with the amazing work ethic and values my family instilled in me. I graduated college, moved to a major city and worked my butt off to become one of the top professionals in my field in my age group with a good living and friends. That journey was of course also filled with plenty of bumps and hardships, but my mom taught me how to keep on going when the going gets tough. I feel really lucky she's mom. I know things are not perfect still, but I'm glad your life is good. Hey, I don't know everything, but my mother really loves her dad and mom. My mother was born in 1965, a time when it was perfectly acceptable to get married and knocked up straight out of high school. My grandmother and grandfather were both born 1946. My mother seems to have grew up pretty normal. Late to the thread and I'm on mobile, so sorry for formatting, but my mom was 15, dad was 16. They both dropped out of high school, fought a lot, and they moved in with my dad's mom. I was constantly left with my grandmas or my mom's siblings as they got older. It just got worse, especially after they turned 21. My dad couldn't take care of himself, let alone a child. I was beat a lot by him and emotionally abused by both my mom, constantly introducing me to her boyfriends, 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 boyfriends, me to her 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 boyfriends, me to her. Mum had me in her first year of university. She was 18. My dad 19 and it was long distance at that point as his country had national service which he had to complete. I'm not too sure when they actually broke up. My dad has other kids now so I don't hear from him. It was probably worse for my mum than me. I lived with my grandparents and she traveled back from university each weekend to see me. I recognized her as my mum and lived with her when she graduated. I don't remember my dad ever being a dad and that has messed me up emotionally but I cope. I'm an only child who bucked the trend on the spoiled trope. I loved having a young mum and I am very close to her and grew up lower middle class, so never felt deprived of anything. The worst bit was growing up mixed race only child without both sides of the family around, but that's a different story. I grew up with my parents. I seen them do stupid things. I seen them make bad decisions and fall into a hard time with drugs and we've gotten evicted. We struggled together. My parents had my brother 10 years later and they have all the negativity in the past. They are doing so great now. I am now a teen mom myself but I'm hoping I have learned from their mistakes and I hope my daughter doesn't see the things I have. You'll do a great job raising your daughter. I'm an only child and my mom had me when she was 18. I'm still an early teen so can't say much about later in life, but so far, it's super cool because my mom is pretty computer savvy, gets some references I make, and we really have a lot in common. I love hanging out with her, which as far as I can tell, is pretty rare, so that's cool. Really the only downside is the guilt of knowing I never really let her enjoy her 20s. So we really got lucky because when my mom had me she was in a bad position financially, and still sort of is, but now we're much better, and she can focus on her career because I can take care of myself. Whereas most people her age are taking maternity leaves or can't focus on their jobs because of their kids. So my single mom is doing really well, and I think she's really cool. TLDR. I like hanging out with her, feel guilty about not letting her enjoy her 20s, and write too many run-on sentences. You sound really close to her. A lot better than you might expect. My mom had a lot of help from family. My dad was meh but him mom was amazing and the best nana you could ever wish for. Now I'm 21 and just graduated, being the first in my entire family to go to college, let alone university. My mom was 19 when she had me. They must be so proud of you. I know I would be. A mixture of good and bad. Birth dad blew out of the picture almost immediately. Classic dude bro who was too immature to be a real father. Never really knew him, even though he lived a couple of miles down the road. Popped out a bunch more kids, and bonded with them instead. Oh well, dude was crap. Alcoholic who my brothers later told me was a douchebag that did absolute crap for them, so I actually dodged a bullet. Thankfully, my mom realized she wasn't mature enough to handle a kid. I was raised by my grandparents until I was about 7 or 8. When I moved into a house with my mom and stepdad different than birth dad, once they had a stable home environment. I got a little sister a few years later, and there was some semblance of normalcy for my teen years. Maybe it's just me, but having a young parent, the biggest thing I realized was how much they just didn't give a crap about the little stuff. Think the exact opposite of helicopter parenting. So long as I didn't bring home an F or murder someone, I think I could have done just about anything and they wouldn't mind. Sounds bad, but really, I'm a successful, independent person. I learned very young how to take care of myself, cook, clean, do laundry, and live alone by the time I was 12. That's the upside. Downside was the whole issue with my dad leaving. For years, I felt like I just wasn't good enough, that my younger half brothers and sisters were somehow more desirable. When discovered I was gay, I thought that was why he didn't want me, like I was defective. Actually, I felt betrayed by my mother, too. She didn't even try with me. For years, I just assumed nobody wanted me but my grandparents. Led to a lot of self-esteem issues. Grew out of all of that, but my childhood was one long emotional roller coaster and confusing sources of parenting advice. Just wanted to let you know, I'm glad you're doing alright now. Wish you sunshine along your way. I grew up without having much money. My mum was always determined for me to have nice things but sometimes we would be left short. especially after my dad fricked over my mum when they split. There were times where we wouldn't have enough for food, so my lunch would have been butter icing since that's all we had. Sometimes we wouldn't have electricity, or hot water, or internet. It was tough because we simply didn't have enough money to make ends meet. I moved out last year to stay with my grandparents for college, and my mum and stepdad are still struggling. I wish I had enough money to help them out so that every week they aren't stressed about bills and food. I don't have any ill feelings towards her because she was put into a crappy situation by my dad and could never bounce back from it. She raised me right and always encouraged me to chase my dreams and couldn't be more proud of me. We are very close. My dad, on the other hand, it's a very strained relationship. He doesn't support me in what I want to do with my life and makes me doubt myself. He always finds something to complain about, no matter what I do. He's married to my stepmother and is considerably better off than my mum financially, but was always stubborn and bitter about paying me child support. He could always go on holidays abroad, managing to take his stepkids and my half-sister but never me, so there is a lot of resentment there. Overall, my upbringing wasn't too bad, although there were days as an early teen that I hated my mum because of the things I didn't have, but honestly I didn't need it. The love and support is enough, and hey, maybe one day I'll make my dad proud. About as terribly as you could expect. They had me when they were super young, then 2 more in the few years after that, then divorced shortly after that. Both my brothers were really messed up by it and never really got over it. They eventually started to be able to civil with each other again, but it took a good 15 years after the divorce for that to come around. I ended up waiting until my late 20s to have my first kid, was actually about a month ago, to make sure I'd be in a good place for when it happened. My mom had 4 of us by the time she was 22. I was the last, born when she was 22, but she had my brother first when she was about 15-16. The first and third had to go live with our grandparents on our dad's side who fricked them up. One's in jail, the other is on drugs somewhere in the city. The second and I live together now, but my mom couldn't wait to get rid of us. Kicked me out when I turned 18. Married some guy, and finally got to do all the things she never could. We grew up poor with a steady flow of her boyfriends coming in and out of our lives. All of us children are unhappy and struggling to get by, but we do our best. None of us think of her as a mom really. She's more of a friend you ask for advice sometimes and see on Christmas. She's good with words, but when I was being kicked out of my abusive boyfriend's house, she refused to let me sleep at her house for a couple weeks. Sucks, but it is what it is. My mom was 16 and my dad was 17 when I was born in the late 80s. We were poor a lot and my parents worked while going to community college, so my brothers and I was the oldest, spent a lot of time with extended family. I got asked a lot at school about my older brother or sister taking me to school or picking me up, and I was always so embarrassed to explain that it was actually my parents. Even now, as a 30-year-old woman, many people confuse my mother for my sister or won't believe that she is a grandmother. My parents fought a lot and divorced when I was 10. The good news is they were both very open about physical education because they didn't want me to make the same mistakes. This post is a trigger for me because for my entire teens and 20s, I was 8 years old emotionally. I lived a fairly civil life as a kid. Lots of domestic violence stuff between her and stepdad, but we had food in our tummy and clothes on our backs. She's never talked about it, but I think she was physically shamed and sent away to live with her godfather when she was very young. Her godfather's wife physically and emotionally abused her, and that's all I know about her childhood. Then, she had me at 17. The last time I felt love for my mother was when I was about 9. At 10, I swallowed an entire bottle of 800 milligrams Tylenol. At 11, I told her I wanted to die and she said that she would donate my body to science. At 12, I was tired of orchestra and joined a volleyball team as a mandatory elective. The only way to pass was to stay after school, practice and show up to games. The first day of practice she would not pick me up from school, so I walked 6 miles home and got grounded for showing up after dark. At 13, we were at the mall and I was holding her hand and she told me not to touch her because she didn't want to look like a lesbian. At 15, when I told her that her husband had physically shamed me, she did nothing to console me. At 16, when I had an interest in college, the only thing she told me is, "Don't be a prostitute." At 17, I knew nothing about college and the fastest way out of town was the military, so I went and got kicked out because I was a loser. I also led a dangerously promiscuous life and fear I may never have a baby or a partner because of her. My second greatest fear is also getting pregnant and being a mother like her. My third greatest fear is being loved the way I deserve. I'm emotionally freaking bankrupt. I am still trying to pick up the pieces from my 20s. At 31, I have little assets, no degree, a weird resume, live with 5 roommates and am a loner. I'm attractive, fun and friendly, but it's who I have to play to feel an ounce of normalcy. I've worked incredibly hard not to revert to being that 8-year-old kid still needing a mom because I have keep it together for my bro. As the middle child, he been emotionally tortured longer than I have because he didn't move away at 18. And I do it for myself because I want, more than anything, to be a loving, emotionally stable wife. TD. LR. At 31, I'm finally taking steps to be strong and grow up emotionally because my mother's narcissism toward my 27-year-old brother has caused him to have a nervous breakdown. History repeating itself, and he's only reason why I am still alive. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.